So I would read that the last
Stand by. Please.
why should that city, defenseless and pure as the wedding necklace of a forgotten tribe, keep offering itself to me? Like blue and red-brown seeds bedded into zygote in the copper desert 7 centuries ago, where ochre rubbed into stone still waits for the brow and cheekbone it would adorn, though for all that time there has been no one. What evil in me, what pity has made me deserve this offering? It stands before me ready, not even the smoke from one chimney is lacking, not one echo when I step across the rivers that separate us. Perhaps Anna and Dora Drużyno have called to me 300 miles inside Arizona, because except for me, no one else knows that they ever lived. They trot before me on Embankment Street, two gently born parakeets from Samogitia, and at night they unravel their spinster tresses of grey hair. Here there is no earlier and no later. The seasons of the year and of the day are simultaneous. At dawn, shit wagons leave town in long rows, and municipal employees at the gate collect the turnpike toll in leather bags. Rattling their wheels.
Just 1 second.
What? I make mistakes.
No, you didn't make a mistake. It was a momentary call along.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's too long to read everything. Too long.
No.
Of that, I would read about literary lane.
Please. 1 second. You don't want it? Please.
But what I am going to tell you now is not invented. The narrow street just opposite the university was called, in fact, Literary Lane. On the corner, a bookstore, but not books, just sheets of paper up to the very Literary Lane. On the corner, a bookstore, but not books, just sheets of paper up to the very ceiling. Unbound, tied with string, print and handwriting, in Latin, Cyrillic script, in Hebrew letters, from 300 years ago. Now it seems to me like quite a fortune. From this bookstore you could see a similar one facing it. And their owners were similar too. Faded beards, long black kaftans, red eyelids. They had changed since the day Napoleon passed through this town. Nothing has changed here. The privilege of stones, they always are, for that is the way they like it. Beyond the second store you turn along a wall and pass a house where a poet famous in our city wrote a tale about a princess named Grażyna. Next, it's from a bookstore bags. So I would read that last.
Stand by. Please.
Why should that city, defenseless and pure as the wedding necklace of a forgotten tribe, keep offering itself to me? Like blue and red-brown seeds that it was good in copper desert 7 centuries ago, where ochre rubbed into stone still waits for the brow and cheekbone it would adorn, though for all that time there has been no one. What evil in me, what pity has made me deserve this offering? It stands before me ready, not even the smoke from one chimney is lacking, not one echo when I step across the rivers that separate us. Perhaps Anna and Brad Drużyno have called to me 300 miles inside Arizona, because except for me, no one else knows that they ever lived. They trot before me on Embankment Street, two gently born parakeets from Smogitia, and at night they unravel the spinster tresses of grey hair. Here there is no earlier and no later. The seasons of the year and of the day are simultaneous. At dawn, ship wagons leave town in long rows, and municipal employees at gate collect the turnpike toll in leather bags, rattling their wheels.
Just 1 second.
What? I make mistakes.
No, you can make a mistake. There was a momentary call on.
Yeah. Maybe it's too long to read everything. Too long.
No.
Of that. I would read about literary lane.
Please. 1 second. You don't want it? Please.
But what I am going to tell you now is not invented. The narrow street just opposite the university was called, in fact, Literary Lane. On the corner, a bookstore, but not books, just sheets of paper up to the very ceiling, unbound, tied with string, store.
Call on.
So I would read it the last.
Stand by. Please.
Why should that city, defenseless and pure as the wedding necklace of a forgotten tribe, keep offering itself to me, like blue and red-brown seeds bedded into good in copper desert 7 centuries ago, where ochre wrapped into stone still waits for the brown cheekbone it would adorn, though for all that time there has been no one. What evil in me, what pity has made me deserve this offering? It stands before me ready, not even the smoke from one chimney is lacking, not one echo when I step across the rivers that separate us. Perhaps Anna and Brad Drużyno have called to me 300 miles inside Arizona, because except for me, no one else knows that they ever lived. They trot before me on Embankment Street, two gently born parakeets from Smogitia, and at night they unravel the spinster tresses of grey hair. Here there is no earlier and no later. The seasons of the year and of the day are simultaneous. At dawn, ship wagons leave town in long rows, and municipal employees at gate collect the turnpike toll in leather bags, rattling their wheels.
Just 1 second.
What? I make mistakes.
No, you can make a mistake. There was a momentary call on.
Yeah. Maybe it's too long to read everything. Too long.
No.
Of that. I would read about literary lane.
Please. 1 second. You don't want it? Please.
But what I am going to tell you now is not invented. The narrow street just opposite the university was called, in fact, Literary Lane. On the corner, a bookstore, but not books, just sheets of paper up to the very ceiling, unbound, tied with string, print and handwriting, in Latin, Cyrillic script, in Hebrew letters, from 300 years ago. Now it seems to me like quite a fortune. From this bookstore you could see a similar one facing it. And their owners were similar too. Faded beards, long black kaftans, red eyelids. They hadn't changed since the day Napoleon passed through this town. Nothing has changed here. The privilege of stones, they always are, for that is the way they like it. Beyond the second store, you turn along a wall and pass a house where a poet famous in our city wrote a tale about a princess named Grażyna. Next, a wooden gate studded with nails as huge as fists. Unvowed to the right, stairs smelling of oil paint, where I live. Not that I myself chose Literary Lane. It just happened. There was a room for rent, low-ceilinged, with a bay window, an oak bed, heated well that severe winter by a stove that used to devour logs brought from the hallway by the old servant woman Elizabeth. Well, I guess that's all.
That's a good one.
Invariably,
What?
I said invariably, please.
In 1933, something strange happened. I received from Paris, from my French writing cousin, Oscar Milosz, his little booklet entitled L'Apocalypse de Saint Jean déchiffré, the Apocalypse of Saint John deciphered, which little booklet predicted horrible conflagration and a war which would start at the Polish port of Gdynia, and my cousin charged me to give that booklet to two persons. One, a person who can be considered a leader of the Catholic community, and another to a serious personality among Jewish rabbis. So I went, I was treated it very seriously, and I went to very important rabbi. I was very young student. I was not admitted to the presence of him, but I gave the booklet to the secretary of the rabbi, and I tried to fulfill the same mission with the Polish community person. So this is a detail. That's obviously on the part of my cousin was a desire of warning of great calamity approaching, great danger. I was very much in the apocalyptic mood at that time. I was writing apocalyptic poetry, and our literary group was known as a group of catastrophists, which strangely went together with my leftist leanings, as I mentioned. But we are perhaps exceptional group because we were maybe leftists, not necessarily Marxists, but leftists, and at the same time pessimists.
Let me, if I may, refer to something else that I've read of yours on this subject, which is about the principle of hope. and how the principle of hope in the face of these apocalyptic visions, and more than visions, these apocalyptic realities, how the principle of hope has sustained you personally.
Well, my guess. You ask me whether my the principle of hope, how it sustained me through all those tribulations and calamities of history. My guess is that it's largely biological. I guess that's a privilege of certain organisms that are by predetermined, so to say, not to live in despair. And besides, there was something which I am indebted to my French cousin, who, however, he predicted terribly calamities. When we separated in Paris in the spring 1935, well, it was perhaps June, I said, if you predict such terrible war, and I am going back there to Poland, who would survive? He said, you will survive. I don't know upon what he based that, but it helped me. And besides, that was not only personal, because in his vision, I believed in his vision of kind of the renewed, renovated earth and heaven, and largely what he foresaw, a new developments in science, especially thanks to Einstein, post-Einsteinian physics, and a possibility of a new world unifying science, religion, and art. So that was, for many years, has been my belief, quite independent of whether I would survive myself, but sort of a rather optimistic view of the future.
What kind of sense of responsibility do you
What?
What kind of sense of responsibility do you feel having survived?
You see, I am not like Abram Sutskever, a poet of the Holocaust. I have tried to avoid historical and political commitments as far as possible. Occasionally, I was cornered by events and by my own anger, moral indignation, to write. So I wouldn't pretend to be a poet of historical consciousness in the first place.
What do you attribute? What do you attribute the fact that you survived to? Do you consider it pahazad? I mean, chance, luck, good fortune? Do you consider it an act of God?
This is difficult. You ask me to what I ascribe the fact that I survived. First of all, the chances of survival for a non-Jew was much greater, and let us not blur the lines. Of course, it is not true that Hitler had a plan to kill all the Jews, and he didn't want to kill the Poles. There was a plan, Nazi plan, to exterminate at least the Polish intelligentsia, and the plan was applied. But nevertheless, it was not on the same level. There was a chance of being caught in the street. As I told you already, I avoided by miracle being caught and sent to Auschwitz. But there were more chances. Second, I don't know, you see, to ascribe to one person an exceptional importance in the sense that God wants me to accomplish an oeuvre, and for that reason preserves my life, is somewhat arrogant. And that arrogance is a temptation, but one should struggle against that temptation, that arrogant temptation. Another thing, that if you are alive, you have a feeling that you should do what you can, but without being quite certain that for that purpose you have been saved.
Thank you. Carol, would you like to ask him a question about Vilna?
Too many questions I've asked him. I know many questions. Vilna to me is...
May I speak?
1 second. Please.
I am tempted still by Vilna. I guess that one shouldn't write on Vilna from one nationality perspective, and a task of writing on Vilna from various sides, in fact, hasn't been done. Of late, I received a proposal from a German publisher to write a small book on Vilna. And maybe I would accept that proposal. And I realize how ignorant I am.
Okay.
Here we go. Stand by, please. Ready and speak.
I am still tempted by Vilna, by history of Vilna. I would write, but I would study first of all. There are so many things about Vilna which I do not know, about the past, the history. And this is a fascinating subject to explore more deeply the history of that city, because it was a city which changed the languages also. That was once the capital of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, but the Grand Duchy of Lithuania.
Hold on.
What?
You
Vilna.
could just begin with, Vilna was once the capital
Vilna was once the capital of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. And the Grand Duchy of Lithuania in the Middle Ages was a huge organism with the majority of the population speaking Eastern Slavic, Proto-Belarusian or Proto-Ukrainian, and not Lithuanian, because Lithuanian was a small group of rulers, but the language, official language of the documents was written in Cyrillic. That was the language. Varieties of Russian, Belarusian, Ukrainian, and that determined the character of the city for a long time before the city became Polish-speaking. That was probably not Lithuanian-speaking, but speaking called Belarusian, something like that. And there was a lot of Orthodox churches in this city earlier than Catholic churches. Moreover, Vilna was a city which burned down several times and burned completely down. All the wooden Vilna was destroyed by fires. In the history of Vilna, there were such events as the Russian invasion in the 17th century. And in my time, when I was a student, they discovered in the basement cellars of the Dominican church a multitude of corpses from the 17th century preserved in a perfect state. Due to certain microclimate in those cellars, they were preserved, mummified in perfect state. And those were victims of the Russian invasion in the 17th century. Moreover, I mentioned also in the 16th century battles between, especially of students, students of the Jesuit Academy and Calvinists. There were Protestantism in Lithuania was quite strong. And there was also a movement of so-called Arianism, anti-Trinitarians, who were very close to the Old Testament, and they had the public disputes with rabbis. They were so-called Judaizing. They had a tendency towards being closer to Judaism than to Roman Catholicism. So you see that abounds in very interesting facts, the history of that city. Okay, I guess that's...
Thank you.
Yes.
My appetite is beginning to abound.
What?
Okay.